I'm going to divide drawing into three categories. One as an art form, two as a design tool, and a third as a perceptual tool for describing and comprehending the visual world. As we shall see, these categories are not hard-edged, and a drawing or painting can encapsulate all three approaches. I hope you can come to recognize aspects of these approaches in drawings when you see them. Firstly, drawing can be an art form. Look at this Morandi etching. It is a drawing and is designed to be appreciated and enjoyed as a work of art in and of itself. This drawing of a head by Del Sarto and this head by Da Vinci can be seen as art forms, and this drawing by Pontormo. But these drawings are also studies for paintings. They are a means to an end. They are drawing as a design tool. The boundary between art form and design tool can be vague. Here is drawing purely as a design tool. This is the napkin drawing for the original minicar by its designer Alec Isagonis. And here is the design for a weapon of mass destruction drawn for the warlord of a princely Renaissance state by Leonardo. These drawings are for design purposes and are part of a process in which designers figure things out. Technical drawing can also be applied to illustrate, to help others figure things out, so to speak, like this wonderfully exploded drawing that shows how something is assembled. I've often admired IKEA product assembly drawings as fine examples of this sort of thing, and some automotive shop manuals I've also referred to are lovely. Of great interest to us are the technical illustrations that are designed to show us, much like the exploded drawing or the shop manual, the components of flowers or plants. I'm putting them largely in the category of design tool, even though in some parts of the world there are galleries serving collectors who justifiably view these illustrations as works of fine art. Sometimes drawings and paintings serving as illustration are more whimsical. They are perhaps designed to allude to the contents of written items like editorial illustration or a book cover. Here are more drawings by Leonardo as he's figuring things out again, so to speak. But this time he's not figuring his own design out, as with the giant crossbow, but rather the design of either God or the evolutionary algorithm. He's trying, through drawing, to comprehend things about the body or natural objects. These Leonardo drawings of the body and natural forms segue into the third category of drawing. That is, as a perceptual tool, a tool for comprehension. Drawing is seeing, and seeing is drawing. Drawing helps us perceptually to comprehend objects in a complex, dimensional world. Drawing is describing form. I think the most productive ways for us to look at our drawing of plants for the purposes of identification should be mainly within the domains of the second and third categories of drawing as illustration and perceptual tool. We will be figuring out, comprehending what we are seeing, and documenting it with as accurate a drawing as we can muster. However, the three boundaries of drawing are vague, and there is always the possibility that an applied drawing of great utility can come to be viewed as an art form, particularly if it turns out to be lyrical, evocative, or provocative. The three categories can perhaps be thought of in terms of a Venn diagram, like this one. And here's the diagram again with my drawing notions applied to it. Let's look at some images and try and locate them in terms of the three categories. Here are some plant and flower paintings by Georgia O'Keeffe. Lovely stuff, pleasing, very pop. Most people are familiar with her work. They seem only marginally observational. They are very interpretive and I might say artsy. Often they allude to similarities between plants and parts of human anatomy and could be described as more whimsical than observational. Shapes and forms reduced and abstracted, they probably would she probably drew from templates developed from decades of observational drawing. Here are a couple more of O'Keeffe's paintings. These are less abstracted and perhaps based more on observation. We recognize these leaves perhaps as some kind of poplar or cottonwood. We recognize this flower as some species of convolvulus, that is a bindweed or morning glory. These are getting closer on the spectrum of the described three categories to the kind of thing I think we want to aim for when we do field sketches of plants for the purpose of learning about them and how to identify them. If we get too whimsical, we might get a pretty floral arrangement, but it lacks the information and detail required for identification. What we want to do in our drawing session for practical and perceptual purposes is not look inside ourselves for inspiration, but look outside at these objects in the world and observe them carefully by drawing. Here's some watercolor drawings by Albert Dürer, the German Renaissance artist who, among so many other accomplishments, meticulously documented inconspicuous objects in the natural world, such as this simple clod of turf. Dürer might have been simply documenting what he saw in the absence of a camera. It might be he hoped to use the detail he recorded here later in a small part of a large studio painting. It might be his watercolor drawings were considered collectible art forms of a sort and of value in and of themselves. They might be early examples of botanical illustrations before botanical illustration had actually become a discipline. Or it might be that they are sketchbook perceptual exercises of a young man observing the world of forms, learning his craft, and developing a sensibility as an artist. It might also be all of these reasons. Likewise, these drawings of the 19th century artist John Ruskin, known as the Great Observer. Ruskin was not a professional artist. He was an aesthete, and art historian and critic primarily, but he nevertheless lavished attention on enormous numbers of drawings and watercolors of landscape and natural forms, all with an astonishing fidelity to detail. These seem to cover all the categories: art, illustration, and evidence of perceptual intensity. Whether you draw for art's sake, for the purposes of study, or illustration, the intense scrutiny that observational drawing and painting provides also allows for valuable perceptual insights that might help us recognize plants as well as understand something about their nature. Before we explore drawing plants further, I want you to try a little experiment that deals with our visual imagination. I want you to take a moment, if you will, hold your hand flat in front of you and imagine a loonie coin in the palm of your hand. Think of its weight. Think of its color. Think of its luster. Think of the relief images and writing on it. You can even imagine sniffing it for a hint of that dull metallic odor. Can you see it? I can, and I have every reason to believe you can visualize the coin in your hand. I'm so familiar with the loonie that I have no problem conjuring up a mental image of it. This is quite a feat of imagination if you think about it. So now I want you to draw it. It doesn't have to be a good drawing, just something that shows details of what we can see clearly in our imagination. Do not take a loonie from your pocket and draw it. You will ruin all the fun. Draw it as you imagine it. Pause the video now for, give yourself 2, 3, or 5 minutes, whatever it takes. I'd love to see some of these drawings in the workshop, so bring them along. Okay, we're back. How'd you all do? Here is my attempt. I've even done the back with the queen. Now, here's the real thing for comparison. My drawings are utterly dismal, and as mentioned, I've been drawing I've been drawing and painting professionally for over 40 years. I very much hope yours are as dreadful. It will make me feel better about mine. If you have done an amazing job from memory, you are evidence against the point I want to try and make. Now, if I were to sit and draw a loonie in front of me observationally, here are the results. Quite a difference. And the back. we seem to have very little visual recall. We think we know what a loony looks like and can see it in our mind's eye, but that picture is obviously incredibly inferential, and ultimately the details are confused and incomplete. We seem to have very little recall, but we have an astonishing ability to recognize something that we've seen before as we see it again when we see it again. This goes further than remembering currency. Think of all the thousands of people you can recognize in your life. And yet, I've known my wife for 50 years or more. She's easily recognizable to me, but I cannot draw an accurate likeness of her. I can do a detailed drawing that looks like a person, but it will only very vaguely look like her. Really, it will just be a person more than an individual. I can use inner templates that I've developed for general anatomy and form, as a result of thousands of hours of observationally drawing people. But I can't draw a person precisely from memory. I can draw the idea of a person, or the idea of a flower, or the idea of a tree or a plant, but it is not as exacting as an observational drawing. Apparently, there is no such thing as photographic memory. People can remember ideas of things and by arranging them in orderly sequences and numbers, and astonishing feats of memory can be done using mnemonic devices, but the memory is not photographic. Think of how much memory is required on your camera for photographs. Our brains would explode if we had photographic memory. If we could condense that photographic information down, say, to a connect the dots drawing, think of how much less memory would be required by our limited brains. Of course, when it's just dots, we don't see a picture. But if we connect the dots, make inferences, we can recognize it. Our limited brains seem designed to be efficient corner cutters. By connecting dots, inferring, and relying on things like recognition instead of total recall to help make sense of the world. In fact, facial recognition by artificial intelligence apparently uses similar shortcuts despite its enormous computing powers. Can you see where this is headed? You want to be able to recognize, not fully recall, plants in the field. You have no need to create a photographic picture in your head of the plants. You just need to spend some time looking at them. And drawing is a wonderful way to accomplish this, and I hope assist with recognition. This is my main pitch for straightforward observational drawing in this botanical context. Here now are some brief tips to help make a coherent and useful drawing while showing you some examples of botanical and natural history drawings and paintings. I'll demonstrate some of them at the easel in the workshop, and you can follow suit. Some forms have a monumental solidity that is perhaps more satisfying to render, like these engravings by the well-known illustrator of natural history, Ernst Haeckel. Sometimes zooming in into a micro level helps reveal a kind of a substantiality of form, which might allow you to use shading. Compare these electron microscope drawings to Haeckel. In general, drawing plants might be a little more challenging, as they are perhaps more complex, bitty, a bit more like tracery, less easy to isolate and describe. So, for plants, you might also consider zooming in on your subject, not to the microscopic level, but to the level of twig or branch. Just as not being able to see the forest for the trees, you might not be able to see the tree for the leaves. The most important indicators for plant identification seems to be leaf shape and arrangement on the twig, vein structure, flower structure. And all of these attributes can be described in a close-up drawing of just a twig. Isolate the main part you want to draw or paint by eliminating background distraction. If you have a collected specimen, lay it on a sheet of paper to draw or paint. Better still, keep the specimen on the plant and put a sheet of your paper behind a sprig of it. Use a bit of tape to hold the paper in place if you will. Now you won't damage the plant and you isolate a small part of that plant to render. Think of pressed flowers and leaves. Botanists have often pressed collected specimens in order to preserve them. You might press specimens under some circumstances, but you can also alter your drawing by simplifying and flattening it out, reducing its three-dimensionality. Compare these renderings to the compressed specimens. See how flat the painting approach is? It might even be the case that the artist has worked from pressed specimens and the two-dimensional quality of the pressings has transferred to the painting to help simplify the arrangement. These flattened drawings and paintings capture wonderfully the very useful indicators mentioned in field guides: leaf shape, arrangement, vein structure, etc. You can also see this flattening approach in both botanical illustrations of the sort that illustrate field guides and books, and you can also see it in sketches made in the field. Most pretty florals that are done on the art end of the spectrum don't flatten things out or isolate shapes in the same way as botanical illustrations and field sketches. Style, technique, and abstraction are wonderfully emotive and evocative, but tend to obfuscate the facts of the subject matter. We can take this flattening effect further by thinking and working schematically. This might be especially effective if you don't have drawing skills or good drawing skills. One of my favorite field guides was an older version of the Peterson Field Guide series to trees and shrubs by George and Olivia Petrides. The current tree guides by the authors are beautifully illustrated and rendered with color plates. The flattening effect I've just described is at work in these new versions, and just a small sprig of a branch provides the essentials of identification. But what was astonishing to me in the old guide was how the earlier versions were such schematic and simple line drawings. They were not beautifully rendered. The only color was one tint of green that was the same in every illustration. Nevertheless, these schema were remarkably functional. The tinted drawings were not trying to capture exactly how a tree or shrub sprig looked, but rather to capture the idea of it. Think back to the Looney exercise we did. As simple as the drawings were in the old book, as simple as they were able to illustrate the salient distinguishing characteristics of a plant, the important visual indicators for identification. I've mentioned a few previously, but you can go to most field guides and note them yourself. Here are some. The leaf shape. Simple or compound leaf, that is, whether the leaf is broken down into leaflets. The structure of any flowers, regular, irregular, or inflorescences, etc. The type of vein structure on the leaves, opposite or alternate leaves on the stem. Smooth or saw-toothed leaved edges, whether leaves clasp the stem, whether they are whorled or in rosettes on the base of a flower stem, whether leaves have lobes and clefts. Now, of course, you could write all this down in point form, and often in field sketches you will see notes accompanying a drawing, painting, or sketch. Likewise, a list of attributes will usually accompany an illustration in a field guide. But if you make an observational drawing that captures all of the above, you don't actually need to write a list. A picture is worth 1,000 words, some dozens anyway. Even in a simple schematic drawing, it's all there to behold. Shading may not at all be necessary for your recording, for your drawing. A simple line drawing might suffice, although a wash of color might make the drawing look more compelling. Of course, in the field or in the garden, you might take a photo as well as make a drawing, but photos tend to provide too much information. They are confusing and don't tend to show the identifying characteristics of a plant clearly. However, there are now plant apps for your computer and phone, for example, plantnet.org. Apps in artificial intelligence seems to be able to do a better job of identifying a plant from a photo than I can with my eye. Apps seem fairly accurate. I've even submitted my paintings of garden lettuce for ID and had them come up as the top choice. Photos and apps are great for that casual ID, but they won't provide you with they won't allow you to lavish visual attention on the plant so that you might recognize it again yourself. This is what I fear. This is the disaster of the camera in the modern visual world. It is effectively preventing us from taking the time to look closely and intensely at the world and at art with our own eyes. Much of contemporary art isn't even designed to be looked at intensely. We're deluged on all fronts by an epidemic of images and simply don't take note of them. Garbage in, garbage out. So if you use a camera or an app in field studies, I urge you to still take the time to sit and draw your subjects. You can also pick a specimen and press it, but this damages the plant, and in many circumstances it is not advisable. For example, in the garden or with rare or important species. What better approach than to sit comfortably in the field and look intensely and draw what you see? The wonderful thing about the simple schematic approach to drawing plants is that the drawing will capture and make note of identifying characteristics of that plant. And as with painting or drawing observationally to create a work of art, it will also allow you to spend time lavishing visual attention on your subject, naturally stimulating your ability to recognize, if not, fully recall your subject. Your finished drawings will also be immensely helpful for you to be able to recognize and even conjure up a mental image of the plant again. Your drawings will accumulate over time and document your journey exploring the plant populations of your locality, your expanding awareness of the botanical world, and your sketchbook might even act as a personal field guide or reference book. I hope very much that the drawing component of this workshop complements the lore and expertise of our elder expert. I hope you come back to the Indigenous Medicinal Plants Garden at the museum to look at to look and draw at different times of the year, and I hope you also continue to improve your drawing and painting skills through practice. Drawing is seeing, and seeing is drawing.